She would slip through the early morning haze before dawn, balancing a steaming mug in one hand and a small paper bag in the other, carefully choosing the quiet corners where the homeless gathered. She had studied the map of her city and memorized the faces of people sleeping on cardboard barricades or huddled under thin blankets. And each morning she pressed a gentle knock to their shoulders. Over time she stopped knocking. They recognized her steps, the fresh coffee aroma, the warm bread scent, and they already turned their heads when they heard her approach. She sustained a daily ritual that began with soft words of encouragement and occasional laughter as she passed out sustenance in those cold months and hot afternoons. She asked no questions beyond names, and none of them asked for more. She offered food, kindness, and brief company before rushing off to her job teaching literature at the local high school. She walked into her classroom, her palms still tingling from the chill morning air, but her mind focused on poetry and metaphors. She never once mentioned the corner benches or the cardboard dwellings that dotted the city streets. She kept her two worlds separate, but she wasn't ashamed. She simply believed that miracles of kindness happened when you stayed humble and did good without expecting to be seen. Her wedding invitations lay across the small oak table in her apartment, surrounded by discarded envelopes and stray ribbons. They needed one more stamp, but she paused, hesitating over the final name. A name that didn't appear on her guest list. A name she had never invited or made arrangements for. A name she hadn't forgotten. He sat several blocks away on worn steps of an abandoned storefront, the same spot she first found him years ago when he trembled from the cold. He looked the same now as he had then, sunken eyes, unkempt hair, a beard tangled with bits of straw, and yet now there was a quiet dignity in the slow rise and fall of his chest. His clothes remained threadbare, but he carried himself with a serenity she had never witnessed before. She paused on the sidewalk, watching him fold a newspaper into a hat for a passing child, a scene so surreal it blocked out everything else. She thought of the first time she saw him. She had been 25, recently moved to the city, with a heart full of youthful idealism and pockets never quite deep enough. She carried 2 sandwiches and an extra coffee. He approached her as she crouched to speak to an elderly woman, her wrinkled face melting into a smile as she received the bag. He asked if she had any extra bread. She remembered the guttural hesitation in his voice, the way he avoided eye contact, the way his hands shook as he accepted a single slice ripped from the second sandwich. She lifted her gaze and saw a man, trapped in hunger and shame. "I can't promise tomorrow," she said softly, "but today you have enough." She left more coffee and the second sandwich, stepping away as his hand trembled around the cup. The next morning, he arrived before she did. She brought food to his blanket and found him waiting with a shy nod. He spoke his name for the first time, a name that sounded almost lyrical. "Elias," he whispered. "I'm Maria," she replied. "Good morning, Elias." And so began a connection that neither had anticipated. She learned he had been a mechanic before a string of personal tragedies unraveled his world. He'd lost his job first, then his home, then his belief that life could mean anything more. As spring faded into summer, she delivered ice-cold water instead of hot coffee. She traded her robust soup for fresh fruit. She listened. Sometimes she talked. Sometimes she read passages from her favorite poems. She offered moments of normalcy, stolen from her lunch hour. Elias's world grew stranger when she clutched a novel in her free hand one morning, a copy of Les Miserables. He sat as she read a passage aloud, his face lighting at the familiar words. His low voice recited lines back to her, and she realized he had once known literature before everything fell apart. "I used to read," he confessed. "I used to fix cars by day and read by night." "You still can," she told him. And so a battered volume of poetry changed hands. Maria offered the book. He kept it in his coat, turning the pages by occasional lamplight. Over time, his words changed. His voice gained strength, his back straightened. She didn't tell many people. Her friends praised her for baking treats and helping at the food bank, but nobody heard about Elias. She wanted him to stand on his own. She wanted him to feel worthy. Nearly 3 years passed with quiet persistence. Elias worked odd jobs. Short stint fixing a neighbor's lawnmower, a weekend shift washing cars. Maria's friends noticed a subtle difference in her, the way her eyes glowed after her morning visits, as though she had glimpsed something extraordinary, though she never spoke of it. One winter's night, Maria rushed away from her classes to find Elias missing from his usual spot. She searched the blankets and cardboard houses until she found him in a small parish clinic, wrapped in a donated blanket, leaning against a nurse's shoulder. A cough rattled his chest. Pneumonia. She held his hand as he drifted in and out of fevered sleep. She sat at the bedside reading aloud passages from the red-covered poetry book. She stayed until dawn, reading through coughs and drug-induced silence. His hand finally squeezed hers, and his lips moved in a faint smile when he recognized the lines. "Thank you," he whispered. She cleaned his face, smoothed his hair, bought him fresh clothes when he was well enough, and helped him find a steady job at a local repair shop. Eventually, he found a tiny room with heat and windows. He waved to her through the glass. She nearly argued with him, wanting to keep him near, but he insisted it was time to stand on his own. She bowed her head and watched as he walked away, confident and tall, carrying his book in a cloth bag. Maria's heart clenched but swelled with pride. At her wedding rehearsal, she thought of him again, his joyous grin when she announced her engagement. She wondered if he would come, if she should call him. She debated sending an invitation, but she feared the weight of expectation. She wanted it to be genuine, an act of friendship rather than duty. The day arrived with cloudless skies. Maria slipped into her gown, its silk sheen shimmering in the morning light. She glanced at the clock at her phone, but she said nothing to her bridesmaids. She smiled, breathed deeply, and whispered into the mirror, "If he comes, I will be overjoyed." The ceremony took place beneath a canopy of white blossoms in the garden of her family home. Soft music filled the air. Guests murmured in excitement. No one else seemed to notice the lone figure standing just beyond the arch, a man in simple clothes holding a battered book. She saw him out of the corner of her eye. For a moment, she froze. He'd shaved his beard and combed his hair. He wore a crisp shirt and dark pants, yet he carried that familiar cloth bag, worn at the edges. She broke from her father's arm and walked toward him. Her dress fanned out behind her. The guests parted without understanding why. She reached him and he knelt, pulling something from the cloth bag. She could not comprehend what he revealed. A small, leather-bound journal, pages yellowed. Handwritten notes and scrap paper filled the margins, all detailing her acts of kindness. Every cup of coffee logged, every sandwich noted, every poem read transcribed. He had anchored her kindness into words. "For you," he said, voice thick. "So you know how much you changed me. So you know the impact of your kindness." He rose, bowed his head, and stepped aside, allowing the ceremony to continue. Maria's world tilted. She held the journal to her chest, ran her fingers across the leather. Tears fell as she read a single line scrawled inside. "One cup, one sandwich, one poem at a time, you built me back to life." Her groom took her hand and she looked up at him with shining eyes. He squeezed her fingers and she said softly, "This is the moment I will remember for the rest of my life." The ceremony proceeded with gentle music, but Maria's mind raced. She'd always believed in small gestures. She'd always known that kindness mattered. But in that instant, as petals drifted around her, she felt the enormity of their ripple across a life broken and made whole. The reception unfurled with laughter and dancing. Guests raised glasses. Maria slipped away to the garden fountain, journal tucked beneath her arm. She found Elias leaning against a marble statue, quietly watching the celebration. "Thank you," she said. He smiled and nodded. "You have a life, now," she added. "Because of you," he replied. They stood together in silence, two souls bound by simple acts. Around them, the world spun with music and joy. Later, she would speak about this moment in her speeches, describing how giving without expectation can lead to miracles. She would encourage her guests to reach beyond their circles. She would tell them of Elias, who once sat alone on cold steps and now shared in their joy. Years later, when their children asked about the leather-bound journal, she would open its pages and read about the early mornings, the trembling cups of coffee, the poetry that mended a heart. The story would outlive them, carried in whispers of hope. And every time she helped someone in need afterward, she remembered that wedding morning when kindness came back to her in the most beautiful way possible. Maria's heart would always echo with the truth that no matter how small the gift, love grows through giving, and in its bloom, lives are transformed. And so, beneath that canopy of blossoms, she learned the greatest promise of all. When you feed a hungry soul, you nourish your own heart in return.